G'day guys and welcome. My name's Michael and I am the Dead Aussie Gamer, here to share with you my tips, tricks, ideas and strategies for playing and running tabletop role-playing games. Now today we're going to be doing a narrative video focusing on the hero's journey. Now the hero's journey is a technique that's used in storytelling, whether it's comic books or movies or light novels, and it was found by Joseph Campbell, who discovered the idea of the monomyth, a series of checkpoints that we see within narratives that share a common journey. When a hero is involved in a story, there are certain checkpoints we hit as we progress through the story, and no matter what type of adventure we have, these checkpoints are important in finding our true north in the adventure. As role players, we often find that as we run games or as we host our players, they tend to go on different tangents, making it difficult to wrangle our story to accommodate for the agency we give to our players. Fret not, because as long as you are aware of the hero's journey, you will not only know where you are, but where you are supposed to be in the journey for your narrative. So allow me to take you on the hero's journey as we explore it from the role-playing perspective. If you do have any questions, do keep them down in the chat below. I will be as active as possible and help you guys in any way I can to digest this very awesome and intricate narrative technique. So step one. For me, when I look at the hero's journey, we need to break it down into 3 acts. The beginning act, where we establish, the norm, establish where everything is. The second act, where the main bulk of the adventure really happens. Towards the end of Act 2, we see kind of a decline or a kind of fall in a kind of way, only to see it being risen in the third act to the epic finale and conclusion. The 3-act idea of a narrative is a very common one, and it is what the hero's journey is based on. So, with that in mind, let's look at Act 1, which is establishing. The first thing we want to establish is the ordinary world. What happens in the day-to-day life of our hero before they become an adventurer, before they become a hero? What is the common knowledge your players will understand? If you are playing in a custom setting, it could be as simple as making the players understand what particular things mean. Are goblins in your world these tiny little pestilent creatures that happen to eat everything and are voracious in their nature? Or are they maybe mechanical tinkerers with a more piratey type of accent and a life on the high sea aboard these giant steamboats that spew out foam and smog? What is the norm in your world? Once we've established that, our PCs then have something tangible to grasp on and find their foundation. These are usually your first few games where your players may have class levels, but they don't necessarily have that rise or that motivation just yet. This is where our next step comes in, the call to adventure. Now, if you're like me, you have communicated with your players exactly what your adventure is, you've given them the premise so that they can build their characters, based on that. The call to adventure is about giving them that trumpet sound, that fanfare that announces, you guys are heroes. You guys are now going to be champions. You are now set apart from the NPCs that comprise your day-to-day life, and you will be something more, something fantastic. This call to adventure needs to be answered. So if you are a player at a table and you've got 1 or 2 belligerent players who say, I would like to go on this adventure, but what's it pay? If everyone's like that, the adventure goes nowhere. So you need to make sure that at least one person, if not multiple people, are answering that call to adventure and heading straight into it. Now, I know the next thing is going to kind of backtrack on what I just said, but there is also in the hero's journey this refusal step. That point where life, in its more mundane sense, in the ordinary, seems to be the preferable choice. Why go out and put yourself in danger when, in fact, you could just leave a quiet and normal life? The refusal isn't about not answering the call to adventure. It's about having doubts about the call. It's about having doubts within yourself. Are you strong enough? Are you the right person for the job? Are we even prepared for this adventure? These kinds of doubts can be established in a role-playing game by showing a grid of power and experience. Having an NPC show up who is more experienced, who does what the PCs may have done to establish themselves as heroes twice as easy, might just give them a scope of how this world treats people who are along that path. It may treat them as, well and truly prodigies. Whatever the case is, it needs to raise the idea that maybe the PCs could use a little bit more of a push before they get to that stage where they're full-blown heroes. The reason it does this step is, of course, to establish and set up the next big step, which is meeting a mentor. Meeting someone who will guide your players along the narrative and along the quest line. In a lot of adventures, you will find that the quest giver themselves tend to be the mentor. Someone who has said, I need you to climb this mountain, and I need you to return with the sacred stone of Cromclach. And with that, we shall be able to put to rest the evil demagogue that lives and lurks beneath the earth's crust. This mentor guides the PCs, gives them strength, gives them special powers and abilities, and helps instill that confidence in themselves to go on their adventure. So this is the establishment. This is getting them off the ground and into the world of the adventure. I would say that if you're looking at a standard, level 1 to level 20 type game, this is something you want to do between levels 1 to maybe level 5. Once you've hit about level 5, that's when the real fun starts. That's when you really start to kick things up a notch. And we then step into the next phase, which is Act 2. There we go. Bye-bye. All right. Act 2 is all about entering or leaving the ordinary world behind, leaving that old and simple life behind, and joining the heroic world, the special world, the world that we now live in as heroes. The first step here, the first checkpoint, is crossing that threshold, finding something that draws that line that separated you from being your normal person in Act 1 to your hero in Act 2. One great technique that I love using as a GM is finding something that absolutely trounces them in early levels and then reintroducing it at this point in the story. This could be that in the beginning of the adventure, you fought a giant bear and came off with barely alive, pun intended. Whereas now that you've had your mentor, now that you're a few levels higher, now that you've kind of progressed, you come across a dire bear and two massive bears, and they don't pose any problem. This here is a motivation booster. This is the point where you want to convince your players that they are in fact truly mighty. Give them a whole bunch of encounters that aren't fights to the death. They are things that they accomplish things left, right, and center and just have a great time. This is what, ideally, will force your players to, not force, but sort of convince your players that this game is a lot of fun, really worth playing, because this is the moment they feel the best. The next step is your test. This is also where you kind of make friends, you make enemies, you kind of are challenged, and you kind of build and develop the specific type of heroes your PCs happen to be. Are your PCs very mercenary heavy and like money? Well, then maybe they meet people who don't like that element of them. They don't like the fact that they're so callous and only do things when it's in their interest. Maybe they make enemies from that. Or alternatively, maybe they're all goody two-shoes and they get in the way of the wrong underbelly criminal sort who say, well, we need to get rid of these hero sorts. Whichever the case may be, this is the point where the bulk of the adventure starts building up, where it is no longer about the world influencing your players, but your players giving back to the world and influencing it. Next up is the inner conflict. Now, the inner conflict is very interesting because it's hard to do in a narrative for a RPG. Allow me to explain. Everyone goes through a certain personal story. When you're in a role-playing game situation, as a GM, it's hard to focus on any one particular individual for too long, because it's obviously going to be a story about this person or that person, and focusing on it for a long period of time isolates your other players. The inner conflict is about having that player go through their own personal, trial, their own personal ordeal that they need to overcome. this is about foreshadowing that, I guess. A good example would be Anakin Skywalker in the Star Wars franchise. He quite literally had a cave that he went into in one of the movies, and was confronted with his fears and his doubts and everything that kind of rattled around in his heart. And, him confronting it was part of this inner conflict. That's kind of the thing we want to create. We want to find those personal elements to our characters or to the PCs and bring them to the surface so that they are going to have to face them one way or another. We then have the ordeal. The ordeal is them actively dealing with their personal conflict. No matter what that happens to be, whether or not it's something small, something large, something ongoing, a nemesis, whatever have you. The ordeal is about engaging and destroying that conflict. And of course, when you do so, you are rewarded for it. Something is granted or given to you, and by surviving your inner conflict and the ordeal that came from it, you have emerged stronger. You've been rewarded with something. This could be as little as, now I'm no longer afraid of this thing, and as such, I can now stand true without all of these terrible things going through my mind. It could be a magic weapon or a magic item, the Excalibur, as it were, being drawn from the lake. All of these things fall into the category of reward. Now, from this point on, we go into our third and final stage, because of course at this point we've really just sort of explored our character's personal growth and personal story. But of course, where does our major plot come in? Where does the villain come in? Well, in our final stage, we look at our character as they begin to try and return to the world that they came from, having grown and expanded from their ordeal, whatever that case may be. And finding the road back is maybe as difficult as finding the road away. At this point, you need to kind of show that the player has grown and evolved into something bigger, and in some cases more dangerous. And this, in turn, draws the attention of more powerful beings. Allow me to give you an example. Looking at the start of an adventure, as I mentioned, there was this hero who showed up in town and kind of outshone the players to begin with. This is kind of the point where the players, now that they've sort of achieved stuff, they've gone and done a few quests here and there, have learned that that hero has died. And the world is currently shaken. The people in the village where they came from don't know what to do without their big, mighty hero. The PCs are now the front line of combat, and they must now rise to the occasion. They must take everything they have and muster it together in order to deal with the final climax. The final climax is the big thing that happens. It is the most dangerous encounter, the final confrontation that they will eventually rise to. Now, there's a lot of take on how this particularly works. The road back, for me, as a step, should always be something that demoralizes your PCs. And I mean this in a good way. The reason being is that if your PCs are defeated, the final climax is enhanced because they go further. They achieve so much more if they're coming from a place where they've recently been defeated. Defeat does not have to mean death. Defeat could mean you need to stop this man from stealing a crystal. You've stopped the man from stealing the crystal and returned it to your quest giver, only to realize that the quest giver was actually the villain the whole time. It might be something along the lines of you finally slew the villain in question. The evil dragon is now no longer a threat, only to learn that the dragon had a child, and the prophecy that said the dragon would burn everything to the ground didn't mean this dragon. It meant the child, now fueled with rage against you. All of this stuff, all of these failings lead to that grand climax, and that victory will be all the more sweeter for your players when they do so. The last thing is to return changed. After the events of the final climax, the players will hopefully emerge victorious. This next step is all about acknowledging their achievement. Nothing is more painful to me than going through a massive adventure, having an awesome time, a great story, building such rich and awesome relationships with people, only to have the end of the campaign simply end like, The Sopranos, for those of you who know the reference. I enjoy an epilogue where I get to kind of see what my impact on the world was. What did I achieve? What did I do? And of course, how have the people in the ordinary world changed because of my actions as a hero? This is a very important kind of thing, but if you are a GM and you've got the opportunity to build a nice swan song to your adventure, why would you not want to? So these steps, these 12 steps that you can use, are incredibly useful, especially when we look at pretty much any kind of adventure. As mentioned before, players can tend to want to do a whole bunch of different things in order to make the game uniquely theirs, and I think they should. Within reason, of course. You can't just abandon the adventure and go off on your own tangent, but if you have a particular way of solving problems, if you have a particular journey that you wish to take, then I encourage you to be able to talk to your GM about it and explore those avenues and explore those ideas. And as a GM, you should also be willing to explore those ideas. But obviously it can be hard, it can be challenging, especially if you don't know where these roads lie. As long as you follow these 12 steps, you will always find your true north. You will always find your way back to the finale and the conclusion, no matter where you go. Alright guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Share this video around because the hero's journey applies not only to role-playing games, but tons of stories as well. So share it far and wide because hopefully it'll help you and everyone else who happens to be interested in a decent narrative checkpoint system. Of course, go and check out our other stuff. We have Twitch, we have Facebook, we have Patreon. All the links are in the description below. If you haven't heard, we have upgraded our Patreon stuff. So now you're going to get more stuff for the rewards, which is great, including a performing and acting workshop series that will be released on, I think, twice a month. So yeah, go check that out too. And we do still have plenty of spots left on our live Twitch Play games where you can join if you are a Mythic tier Patreon. Till next time, guys, as always, from the Dead Aussie Gamer to you guys, game hard or die trying. See you later.